Good morning. Um, Last class we have dealt with bipolar affective disorder, which has both the poles of mood. We have mania on the happier side and the depression on the sadder side. But today we will deal with exclusive depressive disorders, wherein there are episodes of depression, single episode, or there might be recurrent episodes of depression without any mania, hypomania, or mixed episodes. So depressive disorders are very common. So if you say most common psychiatric disorders which are seen in the general population are depressive disorders and anxiety disorders. And depression is so common, mostly most of us would have experienced mild or moderate depression at some or the other point of time. And there are people who they have succumbed to depression, cannot come out of it. There are so many people who have committed suicide out of depression. The depression as such is a harmless thing, but the consequences of the dull mood, something like there is the utmost complication is suicide. In between these, there are lots of implications in quality of life. There is poor performance on work level, at a personal level, at a family level. The work conditions, the personal work of a person gets affected. So his occupation gets affected. His family and his society gets affected. And so depression is important because it is the first thing, it is the most common psychiatric illness. Second thing, it can be treated, it can be prevented, and if at all it is not treated and if it is left like that, there are certain grave consequences, and the most gravest one is suicide. So this is an older classification of depression, but which does not hold good these days. But yes, we can classify the depressive episode into reactive depression or an endogenous depression. So there is an external stressor in one's life. Someone has failed an exam, or someone has lost his spouse, or someone has some other, or there has been a severe injury or something, and because of that external stressor, if the person lands up in depression, we call it as reactive depression. There is some other condition called endogenous depression, wherein the factors within the individual, or there is no external stimulus, but even when there is no external stimulus, still the person will be depressed, and that we call it as endogenous depression. So this is one classification, and then the other one is primary and secondary depression. The primary depression is there is no other general medical cause or the neurological cause of depression, but in secondary depression, see long-standing diabetes may land in depression. There are certain general medical conditions, something like hypothyroidism. The patient may present with the symptoms of depression. Most common Parkinsonism can present with symptoms of depression. So, if the symptoms of depression are secondary to a general medical or a neurological condition, we call it as secondary depression. Coming to epidemiology, so lifetime prevalence of depression is around 5 to 17%. Depression is more common in females than in males because of the differences in hormones, and we have childbirth wherein post childbirth they are because of the change in the hormonal pattern of the females, they may land up in postpartum baby blues, which is different from postpartum depression or postpartum psychosis. And there are psychosocial stressors in females are far more compared to that in males. If you take the common ages, it presents in any age, any patient, any age can lead to, I mean, people of any age can have depression, but it is most common in between 20 to 50 years of age. And so an older individual, if it is less than 20 years, most commonly it is secondary to substance abuse. If you see the relationship status, someone with no close interpersonal relationships or someone who is divorced or separated are more prone for depression. So this is important, but because of the changing pattern of any relationships in these days, there are no close interpersonal relationships, there are no friends, there are no family. Family is somewhere else. People are staying all alone. They're staying at places very far away from the family. So there is no close interpersonal relationships, and there are no people to talk to. So there is no social support or emotional support these days, so which is leading to increased incidence of depression. And along with that, you have persons who are staying alone because they are divorced or separated. They are more prone for depressive episodes. Then after epidemiology, you have etiology. In etiology, biological and you have psychosocial factors. And in depression, psychosocial factors play an important role. Okay. So coming to neurochemistry. So the neurotransmitters which are involved in depression. Uh, See, there are low levels of serotonin and norepinephrine and low levels of dopamine in mesolimbic pathway in case of patients with depression. In addition to that, there are high levels of glutamate in hippocampus, and glutamate is an excitatory amino acid. Okay, so this high levels of glutamate they cause excitotoxic effects, and these are responsible for neurocognitive effects in depression. So hormonal dysregulation, the pattern of hormonal dysregulation is this is elevated hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis and elevated basal levels of TSH. So, in cases of hypothyroidism, people may present with depressive symptoms, and in patient with depression, if the person is resistant to treatment with usual antidepressants, addition of thyroxine is an adjunctive treatment for the management of treatment-resistant depression. It's an add-on therapy. Low doses of thyroxine, something around 25 micrograms, they improve symptoms of depression. And elevated hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis activity is seen in patients with depression. And depressive, if you are depressed, you cannot sleep. So, how depression affects sleep physiology? So, there is total sleep time reduction. In addition to that, there is increased nocturnal awakening. So, there will be awakening frequently in the night. And you have two types of sleeps, the REM sleep and NREM sleep. Wherein you have REM sleep is not a deep sleep, NREM sleep is a deep sleep. So when there is increased REM sleep, so the morning patient wakes up and does not feel fresh, refreshed. And there is decreased latency to REM sleep. Once we go into sleep, we'll start our sleep cycle with NREM sleep. And then after 90 minutes or so, then there will be an REM sleep. So most of the time, the first half of the sleep, if around 6 hours you sleep, the first half there will be more NREM sleep, and then second half there will be more REM sleep. But there is decreased latency to REM sleep in case of depression. So if you take PET scans of a patient's brain, there is decreased left anterior brain metabolism, and there is increased activity in non-dominant hemisphere. The other areas which are implicated are prefrontal cortex, amygdala, anterior cingulate, and hippocampus. So, see again, in case of mood disorder, there is 10 to 25% risk if one parent has a mood disorder. And twin studies show that monozygotic twins there is a concordance rate of 70 to 90%. So, even in my monozygotic twins, the concordance rate is not 100%, which means there are other factors other than genetics. So, usually psychosocial factors which affect depression. Moving to psychosocial factors, there are life events which result in depression. See, depression can be precipitated by life events, and not all the life events cause depression, but especially losing a parent before the age of 11, loss of a spouse, and unemployment are the most common life events resulting in acting as precipitating factors for an episode of depression. In addition to this, personality you have seen. There are certain people, there are certain personality types. That you have type A personality, you have type B personality, but again you have cluster A, cluster B, and cluster C personalities. So obsessive compulsive personalities, borderline personalities, they are more prone for depression. Then coming to various theories of depression. So the psychological, what are the underpinnings behind depression in patients? Okay, you have cognitive theory of depression, which was given by Aaron Beck. He says that in a patient with depression, he'll have a negativistic use of self. That is, he feels that he is worthless, that he cannot accomplish tasks, he cannot do anything. So there is negative use of oneself. And then negative use of environment, wherein he feels that the entire environment is hostile. And then he have negativistic views of future, that he'll not have any hope on future, and that tomorrow is going to be good, tomorrow there is hope, nothing will be like there in a person with depression. So this is cognitive triad of depression, we call it. So negativistic views of self, the negativistic views of environment, and future. In addition, there are cognitive distortions in a patient with depression. You see, in a case of persistent low mood, people will not be able to think good. So there'll be certain maladaptive presumptions which the person makes, which further accentuate his depression. We call these as cognitive distortions. For example, there is something called as minimization of positives. So the patient with depression, though there is lots of negativity, even if there is one positive news in his life wherein he has accomplished something, he will not give balance to that particular thing. So even if he has fared well in an examination, or he has cleared an examination, he'll say, okay, so something that was in a fluke. So he'll not accept it. And there are magnification of negatives. So if a small incident occurs, he'll see with magnifying glass and he'll magnify it, and he'll be constantly worried over that. So that is minimization and magnification. In addition to that, you have selective abstraction. So there is lots of incidents that occur, lots of conversation. There might be lots of conversation with people, but he selectively abstract or selectively give importance to certain conversations or incidents, and he'll again increases depression. So he'll interpret them in a negativistic way. So these are certain cognitive distortions. These all the cognitive distortions will act and try to improve depressive mood in a patient with depression. So cognitive behavior therapy is based on identifying these cognitive distortions. So certain people will have certain types of cognitive distortions. You talk to the patient. Okay, I'll tell that in therapies. So then there is a model of learned helplessness. So someone who is depressive, he'll not act or he'll not do certain things which improve depression. So he'll feel helpless, and he doesn't act or do anything which tries to improve his mood or improve his condition. So there was one experiment which was conducted on dogs, wherein the dogs were caged, and the entire cage was connected to an electric circuit, and irrespective of wherever the dogs are, they will be given they are produced I mean they are given electric shocks. So the dog ran from here to there to here, everywhere there is electric shock, and after some time then it recognized that wherever I run, wherever I go, instead of my effort there is no response, there is no outcome. So I'm still receiving electric shock. So the dog stopped running. They stayed at that place and continuously they were inflicted with electric shock. So these dogs later on they were transferred to another cage wherein certain part of it is only electrocuted. So if the dog moves beyond that particular point, it will not receive any electric shock. But because this dog was previously electrocuted in a completely electrocuted cage, it has showed no sense of motivation. They laid down or they stood still at the place they were kept. So that place was where they were receiving electric shock. So they did not explore the environment. They did not try if there is another place wherein we will not have any electric shock. No, they stood like that. So the same thing appears that can be attributed to a patient with depression, wherein they will not try anything because they know that they are helpless and this is not going to impact or help the outcome. So so there is no motivation. There is again so even after electric shocks also there is a no response from the dog. So let the shock kotkoni. Same as with depression. So now coming to clinical features. So we have ICD. So now till now we have covered on epidemiology and etiology. So in etiology we have covered the biological factors and the psychosocial pathways of depression. Now coming to clinical features, the core features of depression are depressed mood. Okay. So the core features of depression are dull mood and lack of interest in activities which should last for at least 2 weeks. These are the core symptoms of depression. Okay. Previously, there was easy fatigability, which was seen in ICD-10 criteria, but was laid as a core criteria. But now it has been shifted to the accessory criteria of depression. So the other criteria are: you have difficulty in concentrating, there are feelings of worthlessness or inappropriate guilt, there is hopelessness, there are recurrent thoughts of death or suicide, there are patterns in changes in appetite or sleep, and then psychomotor agitation or retardation, then reduced energy or fatigue. And in addition to all these symptoms, there should not be any prior manic, hypomanic, or mixed episodes. Okay, so these are the general criteria for depression. So after these criteria, you have to again categorize them based on the severity into mild depression, moderate depression, or severe depression. And again, in moderate depression, you have to categorize whether there are any psychotic symptoms or there are no psychotic symptoms. So is in the case of severe depression. And you have to also see if there are any suicidal attempts or suicidal thoughts also. So based on that, you say major. You have mild depression, so moderate depression with psychotic symptoms, moderate depression without psychotic symptoms. That is how you diagnose a case of depression. I mean, that is how you have to write down the diagnosis. So after this basic criteria, then we have finally come to a diagnosis, and you have labeled and classified the severity of depression. Then that is based on criteria. There are again rating scales. Okay, to rate is a patient with depressive symptoms. So we have objective rating scales and subjective rating scales. Hamilton rating scale for depression is an objective rating scale wherein the investigator or the interviewer he'll ask the questions, and objectively he'll see the patient, and based on that he'll give the rating to the patient. And you have Beck's depression inventory, which is a subjective rating scale, which is given to the patient himself, and he will rate his depression. So these rating scales, they help in assessment of prognosis and response. So for example, score on a particular rating scale is, so for example, it is around 20 on the day of examination. And the patient comes after 2 weeks or 3 weeks. We don't know, we don't have any objective evidence to say that uh, these depressive patient symptoms have come down. So though this patient may have subjective improvement, to objectively quantify the improvement, we need a rating scale. So on the first day, there is around scale score of 20, and after 2 weeks or 3 weeks, the score is 12. So you can objectively and you can quantify the improvement of 8 points. So these rating scales are especially used for research purposes rather than clinical assessments. But certain institutes, they still practice using rating scales for any psychiatric disorder. And then you have a differential diagnosis. Again, you have to differentiate the secondary depression from primary depression. We have other general medical conditions like hypothyroidism, hypoadrenalism, Parkinson's disease, and dementia, bipolar, again, see, bipolar disorder, and other psychiatric disorders. See, other psychiatric disorders also, there may be comorbid depression. See, psychiatry is not an exclusive disorder. So, like for example, patient has depression, that doesn't mean he will not have anxiety disorders. Patient has schizophrenia, that doesn't mean he will not have depression. All these can coexist at any point of time in a patient. But whether what has come first, or what temporarily the illness which has started first is usually given a priority. For example, if I say there is schizophrenia has started and then there is an episode of depression. So you either say which is a schizoaffective disorder depressive type or post schizophrenic depression. If someone has depression, the symptom, he has a diagnosis of depression, but later on he developed psychotic symptoms. We'll see whether the psychotic symptoms are schizophrenia type, or there are just a part of depression. Based on that, you either say that as depression with psychotic symptoms, or maybe depression as a prodrome of schizophrenia. So these diagnoses are not mutually exclusive. And most common comorbid, and we have substance abuse disorders. Someone who is depressed, he'll be so sad, so he'll drink alcohol or he'll resort to drugs. Someone who is so drug addict or he's into addiction, he is into lots of alcohol or some other drugs, so he may land up in depression. So what is first, what is second? Based on that, you'll have diagnosis. And again, now after clinical features, we have course and prognosis. Okay, as I already told you in the last class, you have untreated manic episode which lasts for about 4 to 6 months. This likewise, untreated depression episode lasts for about 6 to 13 months. If it is treated, it lasts for around 3 months. So in depression, there is chronic relapsing and remitting cold. So someone who has an episode of depression, now he may or may not have a depression episode at any point of time. But it is like, so one third of the people will not have any episodes after the first episode, but one third may have chronically, further episodes. And around one third they'll have a very poor prognosis, or they'll be landing in a continuous state of dull mood. And the good prognostic factors in depression are mild episode, no psychotic symptoms, solid friendships, and stable family. So these two are good prognostic factors. At the same time, solid friendships and stable family dynamics are protective factors also, because whenever you have social support, most of the symptoms they come down. See, there is a notion that we say in probably I might have told you previously in your clinical postings also. They say even with for depression, we go to a psychiatrist and they'll prescribe. Antidepressants, but this is not so in case of United States or United Kingdom, where there is they'll be given counseling. Because see, in UK and US the system is entirely different. Most of them they'll be staying all alone, there won't be any social support, so whatever the symptoms they have, they go and talk to a therapist. But in case of India, we have a very strong, we had a very strong I'm sorry we had a very strong family system. We had a very strong interpersonal relationships. So most of these so-called therapy was given in informal manner. They're in the house itself. So someone says, I'm feeling bad, we'll not leave him or her, right? We'll ask him, we'll talk to him, what is the reason, what is the cause, what is the cause, why are you feeling bad? We'll ask them, we'll try to counsel them, we'll try to console them. So most of the mild episodes in India, they won't come to a psychiatrist, because the so-called psychotherapy will be given there in the house or by the friends themselves. So, but beyond that point, if the person is not able to appreciate, or he is not able to cope up with the so-called informal counseling delivered by the friends or family, he will end up in a psychiatrist. So that is the reason most of the mild episodes they do not come to a psychiatrist. So that is where solid friendship and stable family come. So most of these mild episodes can be aborted if you have strong interpersonal relationships, and they may or may not progress to moderate or severe episodes. Coming to management plan. So this is something like a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan, management of depression. So, or sometimes a lifetime plan. So you have two aspects. You have to first, if the patient comes to you with symptoms of depression, first thing you have to assess is whether that is unipolar or bipolar depression. So bipolar depression, so the management is entirely different. Now you have, say, you are confirmed that there is no manic episode, there are no hypomanic episode, there are no risk factors that suggest bipolar depression in a patient. So you finally confirm that it is unipolar or major depressive disorder. Then whether you assess whether this is the first episode or this is a second or third episode of depression. Okay, the first episode, something. So Whether if it is a second or third episode, we assess whether the person is on antidepressants or not. Or if the patient is on antidepressants, you titrate the dose, increase the dose, or add some other adjuvant drugs and treat the patient. The patient is not on antidepressants, again you have to ask the patient which antidepressant he used in the past episode, because once a person responds to one antidepressant, it means that he will respond to that at any point of time also. So based on that, you select the antidepressant and prescribe the patient. And now, no, that is if she said that is a first episode of depression. So you assess the severity of depression. You assess whether the patient it is a mild depression, a moderate depression, or severe depression. So based on that, for mild depression, as I already said, psychotherapy as such is sufficient. For moderate depression, psychotherapy is given along with or without pharmacotherapy. And for severe depression, psychotherapy, pharmacotherapy first and then along with psychotherapy. And you have electroconvulsive therapy, which is usually given in cases of resistant depression or as a first line in severe depression with suicidal attempts or ideas. So for pharmacological management, you have antidepressants. These are the most common prescribed drugs in psychiatry. You have antidepressants, which can also be used for anxiety disorders and obsessive compulsive spectrum disorders also. So antidepressants they act by increase because depression is a state of low levels of serotonin or norepinephrine and certain dopamine in certain areas. So these antidepressants they try to increase the levels of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine based on the selectivity profile of the antidepressant. So if you have SSRIs, they selectively increase the serotonin levels in the synaptic cleft by inhibiting the reuptake of serotonin. So once the serotonin is released, it will bind to the postsynaptic receptor, and then there will be a second messenger pathways which will be activated in the postsynaptic receptor. And whatever the serotonin that is left in the synaptic cleft, that will be taken back by the presynaptic neuron. So that reuptake is blocked by SSRIs. So selectively, they inhibit the reuptake of serotonin. Tricyclic antidepressants are the old antidepressants which have no selectivity. So they'll bind to selective, serotonin receptor. They'll bind to norepinephrine receptor. So they increase the levels of serotonin and norepinephrine. In addition to that, they'll have uh, action at other receptors, something like acetylcholine receptor. They have action at histaminergic receptors. Because of this non-selectivity of TCS, there are lots of side effects with tricyclic antidepressants. In case of MAO inhibitors, they were very old, but these are not used these days because of the side effect profile. You have phenylcyprine, meclobamide, which are now inhibitors. We have selective serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. They are dual action wherein they inhibit the uptake of both serotonin and norepinephrine. We have venlafaxine and desvenlafaxine, which are SNRIs. And we have NDRS, which inhibit the reuptake of norepinephrine and dopamine. We have bupropion. In addition to that, you have agomelatine, which acts on melatonin receptors. And you have norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, which selectively inhibit the uptake of norepinephrine, which are reboxetine and atomoxetine. Okay, this is you'll have another class in antidepressants. This is in nutshell an overview of various antidepressants that are available. Okay, so other drugs which can be used adjunctively are antipsychotics if the patient has psychotic symptoms, and then benzodiazepines to improve the sleep quality, and if at all the patient is agitated, to control the agitation. So you know what are all the drugs which are available, and you have classified the patient severity of depression into mild, moderate, and severe, and then finally uh, start on a drug. And the first line of drugs which are always used are SSRIs because of the side effect profile. They're very safe compared to other antidepressants. So these are the first line of choice of drugs in most of the cases. So start an antidepressant, and the importance of sorry, uh, I mean, it is important to note that if you start a drug today, it will take around 2 weeks to start its action, and at around 6 weeks, this action of antidepressant will be at its maximum. So we have to wait for 2 weeks for the optimal action. So around some of the symptoms they will be start improving within 5 days or 1 week, but response will be seen after 2 weeks. If you started an antidepressant after 2 weeks, there is response. You continue at what dose the patient has responded. You continue at the same dose for around 6 to 9 months. And in case of recurrent episode, you should be treating it for longer periods also. So if the effect there is poorly tolerated because of side effects, then you have to shift to another antidepressant. There is no response also after 1 to 2 weeks, then increase the dose. Then even if that there is no response, then shift to another antidepressant. If there is no response, then you have to start a third choice option. And then if there is no response to two antidepressants at an optimal dose for an optimal period of time, we label it as treatment resistant depression. And I'm not going to details of management of a case with treatment resistant depression, but treatment resistant depression is very difficult to manage. Around 25% of the patient will land in resistant depression. So in patient with resistant depression, you have to have a combination of antidepressants, or you may be combining with antidepressants with antipsychotics, or you might also have to resolve to uh, electroconvulsive therapy. A maintenance treatment of ECT may be reserved in cases of treatment resistant depression. Okay, so this is how you treat. Whereon you continue the treatment for about 6 to 9 months, and after that you cannot stop abruptly. You have to gradually taper the dose of the dose of the antidepressant. So you have to taper at the rate of 25%. So the someone who is taking 20 milligrams, you reduce the dose to 15 milligrams and see for a wait for around 2 weeks. There are no symptoms. The patient is maintaining euthymic with that particular dose. Okay, then after 2 weeks, consider reduction of further 25% of dose. In the process of reduction, if the person has any side effects, I mean, sorry, not side effects, if the symptoms of depression they start emerging again, then you have to go to the previous dose at which the patient was maintaining well, and then you have to continue again for around 6 months or so. So tapering should always be slow. It should be done with caution, looking for any signs and symptoms of depression which may emerge. Then this is in a brief for um, pharmacological management. And now there are lots of psychotherapeutic options which are available for depression, but I have concentrated mostly on cognitive behavioral therapy, interpersonal therapy. See, for any psychiatric disorder, the first thing for psychotherapy is psychoeducation. You have to educate the patient about what is the nature of illness, what is the course of illness, how long he has to take the treatment, and what are the treatment modalities which are available. That is, psychoeducation is a must for all psychiatric disorders. Then, focused first depression, the most uh, beneficial and most researched and most evidence suggests for cognitive behavior therapy. And so again, you have to based when you talk to the patient, you understand the probable problems, or you understand the probable causes of depression in a particular person. If the interpersonal conflict, something like conflict with his wife, or is a reason for depression, or depression is resulting in interpersonal conflict, then you have to give for interpersonal therapy. If the the distortions have to be addressed, then you need to go for cognitive behavior therapy. So the psychotherapy has to be tailored to the patient based on his needs. So cognitive behavior therapy, as I already said, you have negativistic views of the self. In cognitive theory, negativistic views of self, negativistic views of environment and future. So we have thought, emotion, and behavior which go hand in hand. So what you think, you feel, and what you feel, you do. Because we cannot change the thoughts as such, so we'll start focusing on emotions and behaviors, and so that we can change the thoughts. So that is a principle of cognitive behavior therapy. And again, for management of cognitive distortions, we'll try to we'll talk to the patient. We'll ask him to write a thought diary. So some or the other day, he has got a thought, and because of that thought, he felt sad or he was anxious. So we'll ask them to elaborate the chain of thoughts which has resulted in that particular affect, and then we'll try to identify the common cognitive distortions in that particular patient which are resulting him or resulting in a sad mood. Then we'll try to counter those, and we'll ask them, we'll try to validate them with the patient, we'll try to counter the patient that these may not always be true. And then finally we'll try to change those cognitions in that particular patients. I mean, cognitive distortions will try to address and try to modify them. But that is very difficult, and cognitive behavior therapy will be done around 18 to 20 sessions, which will be taking, and it's a long process. And each session there will be certain agenda will be there. There are certain tasks which have to be fulfilled, and once that are fulfilled, and the patient will be moving to the next session. This CBT is a very intensive therapy, and it's difficult, and the patient should be in an accepting state, and you should be cognitively at a particular level of cognition to actually understand what the investigator is trying to explain, and then he should adapt his thoughts and apply his thoughts to his life. Only then the cognitive behavior therapy will be successful. So interpersonal therapy, if there are interpersonal losses, someone lost a spouse resulting in depression, then you have to address those particular issues. Or if depression is resulting in interpersonal conflict with his family members or with his spouse, you have to address the patient. And same is with family therapy, wherein we have to give psychoeducation. And if depression is resulting in familial disturbances, you need to address those in family therapy. Then there are other therapies like electroconvulsive therapy, as I already said. This is the first choice in case of a patient with severe depression with psychotic symptoms. Okay, electroconvulsive therapy, you have unilateral ECT, you have bilateral ECT. There are lots of ECT modalities which can be delivered. I'm not going through the details. We have another class on ECT. So ECT will be given an alternative day for about around 5 to 6 sessions. They'll be given an alternate day, and then you have maintenance ECTs. You have continuation ECTs, and ECT is the first choice in severe depression with suicidal ideas and treatment refractory depression. Then vagal nerve stimulation. So in ECT, we are just delivering an electric uh, impulse to the neurons and trying to alter the chemical or electric activity of the neurons. The same is with vagal nerve stimulation, wherein an electrode is placed in the left vagal nerve, something like a cardiac pacemaker it will be, and stimulating the left vagal nerve is shown to improve mood levels by altering the neurotransmitter profile in the brain. And details of how vagal stimulation works, they are not known. And transcranial magnetic stimulation is same, but is more safer version of electroconvulsive therapy. This can be done in with magnetic stimulus, wherein we use magnetic fields to alter the electric conductivity of the neurons, where it is more acceptable or palatable than electroconvulsive therapy, TC, transcranial magnetic stimulation. And there is RTMS, wherein repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation, you'll have some electrodes which are placed on the scalp, and these electrodes, they'll deliver magnetic energy to the brain cells, and these alter the electric and neurochemical processes of the brain cells, resulting in improved mood. This can be done as an outpatient procedure, which session should be lasting about around 40 minutes. Excuse me. So then a brief note on dysthymia. Okay, major depressive disorder, you have a mood which is abnormal for around 2 weeks. But there are certain people who have a persistent depressive mood for around 2 years or so. All the symptoms of depression will be present, but they will not be of so severity that they can be labeled as an episode of depression. But they are of less severe symptoms which will be persisting for longer duration of time. And in the first 2 years of disorder, there should not be any symptoms severe, so severe that they can be labeled as depressive episode. There should not be any episodes of manic mixed or hypomanic episodes. So dysthymic disorder is thought to be more of psychological in origin rather than biological. So treatment is mostly focused on psychotherapy, and dysthymia is very difficult to cure. If at all, pharmacotherapy can be given. Again, same as depression SSRIs can be used. And someone who is on dysthymia after a long time, he may have another episode of major depressive disorder, where when we call it as double depression. So, a major depressive episode imposed on dysthymia is double depression. Then there is seasonal affective disorder. Seasonal affective disorder is there is no specific um, classification in ICD-10 or the ICD-10. Therein, it will be labeled as recurrent depressive disorder with seasonal onset. That's it. So seasonal affective disorder usually will not be seen in tropical areas, but in the northern hemispheres, wherein there won't be any sunlight, especially in winters, patients will be prone for depression. So this will be seen in somewhere around January and February, wherein winters are at peak. So the patient will land with same symptoms like dull mood, loss of interest, easy irritability, all the symptoms of depression, but that is because of a seasonal change. The treatment is photoelectric phototherapy, wherein the patient will be presented early morning with light with around 2500 lux, which will be presented to the patient for about 2 hours. That is, phototherapy is a treatment for seasonal affective disorder. Drugs can also be used, but again, SSRIs can be used. So for seasonal affective disorder, the treatment is phototherapy. This completes um, your class on depression. So again, if you get a co-mark answer, you have to write some etiology, clinical features, course and prognosis, and management. Under these subheadings, you have to write if you get any question from depression. So, any doubts? Any doubts? I think theory classes are far more boring than the clinical postings, right? Clinical postings were more of fun, more of interaction, but theory classes that to talking to a computer, that is very difficult. There is no interaction, and the subject is also so dry. Okay, anyways, if there are no doubts, we'll conclude the session right now. We'll meet at some other time. Thank you.